so up to this point, we just have some just variables and for loops and whatnot, and some arrays. What we'd like to be able to do is for instance, this array here has some users in there, doesn't it? Right? It'd be nice if we could use that to dynamically render our users right here. Right now, this Alice, Bob, and Charlie are hard-coded into the HTML, correct? Right. We'd like to be able to manipulate that. We could use straight out JavaScript, just like we have been doing. Although the we run the risk that if we that the JavaScript that we write might not be supported for the specific browser that might be executing the JavaScript. Yes, we can't control the version of the browser that folks might choose to use, right, when they execute our code. Right, some of them might come and visit our page using Chrome. Others might visit us with Safari, or Internet Explorer, God forbid. So we can't control that. Who comes and visit us with what version of what browser, right? So what we'd like to be able to do is not have to worry about what browsers is coming to us. Yes, it used to be that we had to write code that identify which version of the browser, which vendor, and then write code specifically for each one of them. Yes, and it was in the code and JavaScript code used to have tons and tons of switch case everywhere in the code, having to behave one way for one vendor for one version of the JavaScript. Because of the browser wars, there was a lot of fragmentation of the language. Yes, and it still is. So jQuery solved that by saying, you know what, instead of you having all these switch statements everywhere, we're going to encapsulate all those switch cases into a function, right? And so instead of you having to do this yourself, you call this function, right? And our function will figure out what to do. We'll check this. We'll do the right thing if it's Chrome. It will do the right thing if it's Safari. It will do the right thing for the right version, and we'll document it how it's supposed to behave. It will behave the same across all browsers, right? We'll make sure that it behaves correctly. Make sense? So today is very rare that folks will write straight JavaScript. They'll instead use some level of abstraction, right? That allows you to code once, run anywhere, just like Java. So jQuery is the Java of browsers. All right, so let's download jQuery. So I'm going to fetch jQuery from a CDN, from a content delivery network, and I'm going to copy it, the minified version. So a minified version is a library that has been optimized, right, for downloading from a CDN, right? They've removed any white spaces. They have renamed all really long variables into like single characters, right? And they have compressed it in such a way that it's almost illegible, right? It's not meant for humans to read this, right? Sometimes they might have also uglified it, made it so that if you try to read it, you won't understand what's happening, right? Yes.
Isn't that like good for companies?
Oh, certainly. Yes. Yeah. So that folks can make it harder on folks to reverse engineer any libraries and things like that, right? But for our purposes, we're interested in the performance, right? And open source libraries are not as much as interested in uglifying it. They want to make sure that it's optimized for downloading purposes. So I just copied the minified version. So we'll copy that. And we're going to go to our HTML file, and we're going to paste it right in here. Okay. Once we've done that, jQuery, the jQuery library will download, and it will declare a single object. Right? It'll declare a global identifier, right, called jQuery. Right? Now, I'm going to drill into you saying that you should never declare any variables that are in the global space, right? But jQuery does it. They're declaring something in global space. And that's fine. I mean, it's jQuery, right? They're very, very famous. They're very successful, and they can get away with this, right? It's actually very convenient that they do this, right? It's jQuery is available everywhere, from anywhere. When you become as famous as jQuery, then go ahead and declare your own variable. Meanwhile, do not declare variables in global space. I'm going to do it at first, and then I'm going to fix it. Yes, I'll do it for convenience, and then I'll fix it. All right, so let's start using jQuery. So what can you do with jQuery? So like the name suggests, is the language allows to query, right? Kind of gives us some notion of like a query language, like like SQL. SQL is a query language. But SQL queries what? Queries data that has been spread out in multiple tables, right? A whole bunch of rows and a whole bunch of tables, and SQL allows you to say, hey, give me all the records that meet this criteria. Yes, it says select this from where. Yes, and then the query engine goes out and says, okay, well, these are all the records that meet your criteria. Yes, and then you can manipulate them, list them, do whatever you want. Here, jQuery does something similar, but it's querying the HTML document. Right? The HTML document is your data, and you want to be able to retrieve things from this document. You want to be able to say, hey, give me all the H1s that have this style and whatnot, right? Or grab me all the ULs, add this, remove this, insert, update, delete. So basically, you are querying your document. You're interacting with your document. So let's see how we can do that. Let's see. We can let's go to our users and let's start querying it. Let's see. We can say say I want to query and retrieve this H1, right? This record or this element H1. We can do that by using jQuery. There's the global constant variable that has been declared, and you can treat it both ways. You can treat it as an object. You can treat it as a function. Right? Most of the cases, just you'll treat it as a function, and that function is a very powerful function. Depending on what you pass it, right, it behaves one way or another. Very much like it's an overloaded function. Yes, but there is no overload in JavaScript. But let's say we can say jQuery. We can pass it, for instance, the name of the element. The name of the element. Says, and this reads, go fetch me the all instances of H1 from the HTML document that I live in. All right, parse the DOM, looking for all the elements that have that name H1, and then we can assign it to a variable. We can say let H1. Now these are all H1s, right? No specific H1. So that gives you a clue on what that syntax, what that string is, right? That string is what? It's a CSS expression, right? So that function can parse the string and realize that, oh, it's CSS. And if it determines that it's CSS, it behaves one way. It says, ooh, you want to select something from the document. You want to bind something that is in the DOM, right? And I'll bind it to this variable, this local variable. And what can you do with it? Well, H1 can, maybe you can remove it. You can say remove, and say if you refresh, notice that let me take out the breakpoints. They're gone. Or users is gone, right? But let's not do that. So there it is. So there's users. Now this doesn't apply all to just this one H1. If you had a lot of H1s, say you had several other H1s in there. Maybe you have not just users. You might have H1. You might have staff. You might have H1 faculty, right? And if you refresh, there it is, right? And if you do this H1 remove, it applies to all H1s. Right? They're all gone. Very much like CSS. Yes, when you style one H1, it styles all of them. Correct? So same idea here, right? Whatever transformation you're doing programmatically, it'll do it to all the elements that match your CSS string. Very good. All right. Let's look at another example. Now to remove, you can say H1. You can change. So let me bring back the contents. Refresh. There it is. You can do other things to transform programmatically. You can change the HTML content of the element, right? HTML is another function that is declared by by jQuery, right? These are not JavaScript, low-level JavaScript commands. These are declared by the API, the jQuery API, right? So the HTML function allows you to modify the HTML content of each one of the elements here. You can give it a string and says, replace whatever the HTML content of those elements are, replace it with the following string. Right now, the HTML content of H1 right here is users, staff, faculty. That's the HTML content of those H1s. Yes, we can replace them and say, user admin, right? If I refresh, notice that they all change to user admin. Make sense? All right, the transformation applies to all of them. Again, not that you would want to do that. Sometimes you want to be more specific. Maybe you didn't mean to modify all H1s. Yes, maybe you meant to modify just one of them. So you could be a little more specific. Yes, you can say, you can give the particular H1 that you want to modify. You can give it an ID, and you can say that this is the main title. Yes, and then here you can be more specific. You can say hash main title. Yes, right. If I refresh, notice that I'm now modifying that one H1, right? And so that string again behaves just like a CSS selector. So since this main style is unique enough, I don't really need the H1, right? Right. So this still works. Just modifying that one element. Yes.
So I assume the alternative is XPath.
Yes, the alternative would be XPath.
Is there like a preference?
Uh,
Like best practice?
no, so here where you're going to use CSS. So CSS is a watered down version of XPath. Just like just like CSS is a watered down of XSLT. So XSLT is a transformation language, right? But in XSLT, you can do iteration, you can do all sorts of programmatic stuff, right? So CSS is a watered down version of that. And the selector language on the left hand side of the rules is a watered down version of XPath. Yeah. So XPath is to XSLT what the selectors are to CSS. All right, excellent. So another thing here is that just these variables here, users and faculty, these are all variables that were created here in the JavaScript file. Yes, and they're just normal types. They are literal strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, and things like that, which are native to the language. Now, these other objects, excuse me. Oh man, thank you. Excuse me. This H1 object is actually bound to the DOM. Right? So sometimes I need to be able to remind it of that. Hey, this is not just any variable. It's a variable that is bound to the DOM, meaning I can manipulate the DOM by manipulating this variable, yes? So a common practice to distinguish between just regular variables and variables that are bound to the DOM is to use some nomenclature. A common nomenclature is to prepend variables that are bound to the DOM using jQuery is to put a $ in front of it. This kind of a reminder. Oh, this is an object that is bound to the DOM. I can manipulate the DOM with it, right? So whatever naming convention you come up with, just stick to it. But a common one is to prepend jQuery variables objects, jQuery object with a $. Make sense? All right. So okay, what else can we do? We can change content. What else can we do? How about we can also change the style programmatically, right? We can change the look and feel. We can say H1, we can say CSS. So CSS is another command. That's another jQuery command that allows you to, like the name suggests, it allows you to configure the style, the CSS style, right? Apply styling. And for instance, you can say, change the color, and I want to change it to red. Right? And if you refresh, it changes that to red. Now, sometimes you're doing several transformations one after another right? I'm changing the HTML, I'm doing the CSS, I'm doing changing attributes, changing a whole bunch of things, right? On the same $h1. Yes, right? When you have a whole bunch of these, it can become fairly long. So what jQuery does is that every function, every jQuery function, it returns the return type of each one of these functions. It returns the original object, right? It returns the original object. So HTML, that function returns h1 and CSS as well. What that allows you to do is to do the following. If you have a whole bunch of transformations, you can string them together. You can say, .html, .css, .this, and you can have on your long laundry list of transformations. Make sense, right? And just to make sure, if you do blue and we refresh, it still works. Yeah, everybody good? Although you can string them together, sometimes you have way too many transformations to fit in one single line. So it's usually a good practice to break them up into separate lines. Yeah, okay, and this still works. Other things that you could do is to not necessarily retrieve and bind elements from the DOM and get a reference, but inject content into the DOM. Right. So let's take a look at that.